little pigs, oh yeah. They're gonna talk about sweet, sweet RPGs. And it's the Titterpigs, the RPG podcast. Am I getting paid for this one?
Hey listeners, we're back with episode 44. Holy shit, Scott, we are almost a half a century old, or at least another episode closer. Welcome to spooky season!
Yes, it is spooky season. Wow.
Cue the freaky music.
Yep. Hold on. There we go. It just played.
Yeah!
So, yes, we were back with another episode, and it is spooky season, and we've got an interesting topic in the main segment that is a bit rambly, but I think we got. Yep.
But we do think we tie a nice little bow on it at the end, so bear with us. Just bear with the two old guys.
I think you're right. I mean, when you spray paint a pile of shit gold, it shines in the sunlight.
True story.
But anyways, yes. So before we get on that subject, we're just going to have a little discussion, see what's new with us, and what we got going on during the spooky season. So rolling on into it, Keith, what's happening with you? What are you up to during the this Halloween time of year?
Actually, though, before I get to that,
okay,
I do want to throw out because we're going to hopefully. The plan is we're dropping this right before Halloween, right? Because spooky season, we got to get this out there.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this, hopefully it's right before Halloween. If you are, Scott and I are going to do our damnedest to do a live stream on Halloween. Mm-hmm. So if you get the chance and if the stars are right, we will do that live stream and you can hang out with us.
Yeah.
So, I mean, more info to follow.
Trick-or-treating, free candy, and people in sexy costumes, or hang with two old farts talking about horror RPGs. Your choice.
I mean, Scott will be wearing a sexy costume. Just saying.
I always do. That's why I record from the chest up.
That's right.
So you'll never know.
Back on topic before I vomit again. So what have I been doing? So I have been running in this spooky season. I have been running a Call of Cthulhu scenario, Lost Hobos and the Wolves of Carcosa. This is Alex Galot's 2024 Gold Any winning 1930s Grindhouse scenario.
Woohoo!
Scott is one of my players, so I'm going to talk about it ever so briefly, but I am not going to go into spoiler territory.
Right.
So as not to spoil anything for Scott or any of my other players who listen to the podcast. Mm-hmm. But what this scenario is all about, in a nutshell, that I can say is a group of hobos basically become couriers and for cash because they are strapped for cash, and you know what? It's the Great Depression, right?
Right.
Got to feed the belly. So got to put food in the belly. They decide to take on this courier job, couriering a package from the United States down into Mexico. They get on a train bound for their first stop from San Diego to Tijuana.
Woo-hoo!
And short ride, and things begin to get a little weird.
Kinda. We're still leading up to that. I mean, this is from a player perspective, right? Because obviously you hold the keys to the kingdom. But I mean, my player character hasn't really witnessed anything weird. He's been associated with some of the other players who may have noticed something off.
Right.
But we really haven't hit the go button in the Cthulhu Mythos weirdness as of yet. We're still on the kind of the slow build.
This
But
one has a slow burn. I will
Mhm.
I will say that this one is definitely on the front end, has a slow burn, and I think that's one of like Alex's signatures in his scenarios.
Yes.
They have he has a tendency to write them with a slow burn on the front end. So keeping it right in par. Now, as the story is evolving, they're getting to know each other as characters. They're riding the rails. They decided to go on the fly, so they chinced out and decided to catch a boxcar from San Diego
Hey
to
man,
Tijuana.
that was $2 for a ticket. Are you out of your mind?
Hey, so they saved themselves some money and caught a free ride down to Tijuana.
TJ baby.
And they meandered around Tijuana a little bit and picked up some additional information that they were they needed to get. Now,
Are you sure about all of that information we needed?
well, yes and no.
Right. Right.
But it was interesting though. They were was it your, I can't remember now off the top of my head if it was your character found a note in their pocket.
Right. Okay. So yes. So there was a slight bit of weirdness that I experienced, and yes, there was a bit of scrap paper that I had found that had some scrawlings on it. Now, of course, and to be fair, I think what to kind of give a better idea of what it is, these hobos. There's a particular definition for hobo, and what is that within the scope of the scenario? It's not
the scope of the scenario. A hobo is a migrant worker,
right.
Typically traveling around the U.S. during the Great Depression, usually catching rail, and they move from city to city, working, get their payment, move on to another place when it's time to move on.
Right. We're not a bunch of homeless drunkards, right? We're not. No. So I mean, it's just the fact that we are homeless and we're traveling to find work and whatnot is kind of the literal definition of the time. So
yep.
So yeah, but I mean, still, we're not grounded in any one area. So I could have picked up the scrap of paper absentmindedly, whatever the case may be. Not too weird, because I mean, how many times have you reached into your own pocket and pulled something out and go, oh, where did this receipt come from? Or I don't remember going here, or whatever the case
fact.
may be. So yeah,
that is a fact.
But the interesting about it is, and I don't think this is spoilers, and is that paper had hobo scrawlings on it, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So Alex, one of the things that Alex has in a lot of his scenarios, he does have some fairly interesting puzzles.
Yes.
that pop up in handout form usually, and it's up to the players to actually utilize their own, not the characters, but the players to figure out the puzzle. They're never really too difficult, and so we had to decipher these things to see what they meant. And in the scope of the game, it was certain things that made sense, other things that didn't really make sense, but they were decipherable. So we got together and we, it was cool. It's like, what is this? This middle finger with a scratch across it, and this particular X cross arrow thing. And you're provided a list of what these mean with the game that all hobos would know. And so that was a bit of fun. But as it stands now, is it a prelude of things that's gonna happen? We don't know. It's just random stuff that doesn't make sense, but it was still cool nonetheless.
Right. So when we left the players at the end of the session, the first session, they had boarded the train again in Tijuana, and they are headed on the Mexicali Express out of Tijuana, on their way to Ensenada with their package, and they've done what every great gaming party does to their game master. They bend him over and ram them one. No, they split the party. So
Right.
I have 2 in one train car and 2 in another. So it's like 2 separate stories going on. So that is where we ended our session. So it's going to evolve how it evolves.
Yes. And like I said in the game, what could go wrong? There's never been a situation in Call of Cthulhu where something horrible happens on a train. So,
right.
But I will say from a player point of view, it's interesting and fun so far. I mean, it's again, as we will discuss in the next segment, Alex's attention to detail is absolute perfection, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, he's a friend, so I'm biased, but whatever, screw you. But yeah, and it's an interesting take, right? Alex's, his grindhouse scenarios deal with things that aren't your standard Call of Cthulhu thing. The mythos may be familiar, but the situation that you're in is always different and cool and neat. So I'm really looking forward to see how it plays out, especially when we get to the moment where you push the dial up to 11. So, but we're still on that kind of everything's hunky dory. We're on a party train, man. We're traveling to Ensenada. Maybe we'll see La Bufadora and then head out to Mexicali. We're drinking cervezas and having a good old time.
Time will tell. Right. You'll just have to sit there with bated breath until we play again.
Right.
So.
Right.
But that's what I've been up to. So.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and roll into our main segment, and then after we're done with that and take a little break, I will tell you what I have been playing and or running or up to during the spooky season.
Let's do it. Well, here we are, main segment time. I recently had an idea that has been brewing around and rolling around in this old melon of mine, and I threw it at Scott, and so here we are.
Right.
I want to talk about using or taking folklore, which let me be very clear before we get some fun pedantic listeners. Yes, Scott, I am using your word tonight, pedantic.
Yes, I love that word.
Folklore encompasses legends, lore, modern urban legends. I think moving forward, we should probably just use legends, ghost story, whatever. Sure. We probably interchange the words. What do you think, Scott?
Absolutely. I mean, this is going to be one of our kind of normal rambly subjects because we have the base of an idea and we're just going to see where it takes us. So as Keith mentioned, it'll incorporate legends, folklore, things such as that, but also kind of focusing on the local aspects of it and how to use the familiarity of things that are around you and that you have witnessed or been to or even live at in real life to add a particular edge to your horror game that you're running for you and your players. So let's dive into this and see where the hell it goes, and hopefully at the end we won't be flushing the toilet.
Let's hope not.
Right. Okay.
So kind of some preamble stuff, right?
Yeah.
This doesn't matter where you live, right? I live in coastal South Carolina. Scott's out in California. It doesn't matter if you're in Europe, Canada, anywhere in the US. It doesn't matter where in the world, right? There's everywhere is history rich, right? There's ghost stories. There's urban legends of sea squatches and, whatever, people living in caves, you name it. There's some kind of weird ghost story or something.
Right. I mean, even as minimal as the creepy old broken down house at the end of your cul-de-sac, right?
Yep.
The one that nobody has lived in years, the storm sewer runoff drains that you decided to go explore as a kid, the creepy homeless guy that turns up at the wrong time all the time. And also, things such as a pretty kitty salon, things that strike fear into the heart of men because we have no idea what goes on in there.
Okay, let's strike the pretty kitty salon, but, hey, teach their own. But Scott's right. I mean, there's inspirational stuff everywhere, no matter where you live. whether we're players or game masters, right? We all think about these things, right? It's October, it's spooky season. We all think about like, hey, what about that? What about that abandoned house or that zombie house, as they like to call them here in the States? You know, that's down the street that looks like shit, shingles falling off, broken windows, some are boarded up, door falling off the hinges. What could I do with that if I was going to write, you know, a scenario, a horror scenario, or an investigative scenario?
Right.
Sorry, got to move a cat. Come on. All right. Sorry about that, listeners. That's what you get when you live in my house. You know, but you take something like that, and then you use that as the nexus for your story, your inspiration. But then, what else do you do with it? Right? It's just a thing. Or do you take the rumor of a ghost story from a local cemetery? It's still just a thing.
Right.
But what I'm proposing is you take that thing and you do a little bit of like actual research.
Right.
You know, Google can be your friend, right? Scott, you use Google. I use Google.
Sure. Yeah. Google can definitely be your friend. And it could lead you down paths that you didn't even know you were going. And it's wonderful to see things come to fruition through a simple search of, let's just say, your local county or your town. You know, there's been plenty of instances where I've done some things, looked up some things, and realized, oh my God, there was a horrible murder that occurred just a few blocks away from my house in like the 1930s or whatever, or things such as that. But it's just, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, horror is always been defined as fear of the unknown, right? I mean, to a certain degree, right? It's the famous quote, fear of the unknown. You know, it's the thing that scares you the most. But I kind of feel like what Keith and I are proposing here to a degree is fear of the known, right? Something that is familiar to you, something that is comfortable to you, something that exists in the real world that can be turned on its head, and that makes it even more scary, you know, because we've talked about this before, and I will continue to, you know, die on this hill. You know, the idea of losing your agency is tantamount to a good horror game, because that is what horror is, and maintaining that is tantamount to telling a good horror story or playing a good horror game. And as disconcerting as a you know, old wood, you know, in 1920s Maine can be, we weren't there. We don't know what it's like. We know what a wood is. You know, we know what things might be like in that day and age, but that old copse of trees, you know, down around the corner from you that you used to, you know, rile through as a kid, and the stories that came from that in your head, to me have a bigger impact in certain things when you're dealing with horror. So, that's
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I mean, me personally, I recall lots of stories just from my town where I grew up in Massachusetts, right?
Right.
You know, mysterious lights on weird roads. Not that the roads, you know, looking at it as an adult, the roads aren't weird. It's just mysterious lights. Ghost stories from some of the oldest cemeteries in town. A place called Goat Rock. Actually, it is called Goat Rock up on one of the cliff sides. We lived in a valley.
Right.
Kids have all kinds of legends and lore about Goat Rock being like a place where goats were sacrificed and all kinds of weird shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, as a kid, we all believe that stuff, and that is the kind of cannon fodder that's perfect for scenarios. Now, you do a little actual research into what like something like that is. Go to the local library, some Google searching, try to find some factual bits about that, and something like Goat Rock, you'll probably find out that what you thought was really cool and real as a kid is not what you thought it was, but the shit you remembered as a kid is still a great inspirational thing,
right?
For a story, and it's something that's still familiar to you and familiar enough to you that you can use it and have memory recall of it to bring it into a story and breathe a life into it that you couldn't otherwise do. And that's one of the things, like, I love horror stories.
Mm-hmm.
I love running horror games. And I do find it sometimes challenging, like you're talking about, like a stand of trees in 1920s Maine, right? In this, maybe there's this really weird situation going on in this log cabin or whatever in the woods, right? Like, I can visualize it, but I wasn't there. It's hard to breathe that real bit of life into it if you haven't been there, and that's true for anything. But when you're trying to build that atmosphere with it, in addition to giving it description and breathe a little bit of life into it, if it's something that is familiar to you, it makes it all the more, it just makes it easier.
Right. I mean, classic example of this would be like a zombie horror RPG. As nice it would be to have it set in Atlanta, Georgia, because everyone's seen the movies or read the comic books, having something like that in your hometown, just tends to make it that much more dramatic, that much more scary, and even, somewhat more humorous, as the asshole who keeps telling you to turn your music down is the first one to go in the zombie apocalypse, and it plays out in the scenario. But also it kind of adds a bit more, and granted, this is something that leans more to a local group, right? I could run a zombie game set in Corona, California. That's the name of the town that I'm near, or Eastvale. And it's not going to mean as much to a bunch of people from the UK. Obviously, as you mentioned earlier, I can make it more detailed and breathe more life into it because I'm familiar with it. Right. But getting a group of people who all share the same location or intimately familiar with it is a lot more interesting in my opinion, because it's when you bust into that local 7-Eleven, everyone knows what that is, what it looks like, and they're familiar with it, and the guy behind the counter that they see every day, and things such as that, and it's something that I feel that everyone should try, at least once, for those interested in horror games, is do something that revolves around something that you have intimate knowledge of one way or another, whether it be, a folklore story, as you said, a ghost story, or a particular urban legend. So, but yeah, it's so how do we do that? we rolling into this. You obviously do some research, but there are certain ways and certain to go about this. So let's see if we can kind of I've got suggestions.
Yeah, I've got some suggestions, at least on the research side, right? I have some formal research training. I was working on a master's degree in history at one point in my past. So, take some of this with a grain of salt. I mean, we are talking about like researching a ghost story or some really weird urban legend of, the Jersey Devil or, what have you. Pick your favorite thing, the Sasquatch, whatever.
Sure.
But let's just take a ghost story. There's a Unitarian cemetery in downtown Charleston, rumored to have several ghosts caught on camera in the cemetery at various times. So if I wanted to take something like that, I would, to use that in my story, in a scenario, and build something around that cemetery and those ghosts, I would recommend going to somebody else. Go do some research, right? Go dig around and do some Google searching. Take Google searching with a grain of salt, because what I'm recommending is you look for find some evidence, hopefully some factual evidence that there's some pictures out there that you can see, because then hopefully you can use that as some inspirational cues for writing. And then maybe you can find some, names of the ghosts. Like this picture or this person is rumored to be this ghost is rumored to be the ghost of this person, right? So now you have some connection to the real world, to bring some realism into the story. But when you do that, though, you don't want to keep, in terms of story design, you don't want to keep it too real, too true to form, because
Right.
obviously anybody that knows anything about that location is going to be obviously too predictable. Um, so you still want to kind of turn, like you said in the introduction, kind of like turn it on its head. But,
Right.
but there are some other things besides, don't just rely on Google, people, please. And Wiki is not your best friend.
No.
Wikipedia
No.
is not your best friend. Libraries. Like, go to your local library. You can find lots of good stuff there. And you know what? They have computers too you can use.
Sure.
Depending on how much research you want to do,
Right.
older books at the library can give you lots of information that you may or may not find online.
Right.
Local, go to like local booksellers, right? Barnes and Noble, at least in the States, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, Half Price Books, all kinds of stuff like that. They will have sections like local history sections, which will usually encompass those kinds of local ghost stories and urban legend type books. Root around in those things. Find some information. A lot of times the authors of those books will actually like give you the factual evidence that you can then make notes on and use that for your, as part of your research.
Right.
I know you're not writing a dissertation, but
Yeah.
that can lead you down interesting paths. If you find some other information you find even more interesting, or something that you can tie back into your developing story, that your idea that you're building in your head that may or may not even be really related, but you're like, that is a killer damn idea and I want to tie it in somehow, some way.
Right.
Then that's a win.
Right. And like you said, it doesn't have to be 100% factual. In fact, it doesn't even have to share, the same exact details of the location or story. I mean, the Jersey Devil could very well be the something else. And I don't know another city, that you can utilize in that area, the Connecticut Devil, whatever the case may be. But,
Right.
and a good example of this is Eric Bloat's Dark Places, Demogorgons. Okay, so what Eric did with this is, of course, he took the idea of the very popular Stranger Things, right? But what he did is he placed that where he lives in Kentucky, which is, in an area called, I think it's Jeffersonburg, right? And it's where
Jefferson Township.
Jefferson Township. So,
Yep.
but he's slightly, but that's the name there. Locally, it's something else. But essentially, the locations there are real locations. There are local folklore that it's associated with it, like the Poplick Bridge and the demon there and other things around there.
Yep.
But he just changed, the serial number slightly to make it a fully realized place that you can technically go to and experience, but it's still a made up town. A lot of the history in there doesn't necessarily reflect exactly, but the Poplick Bridge that exists in Dark Places Demogorgons, you can go there and stand underneath it and see exactly what it is that's mentioned in there. But he added other things to it, right? Not everything that he has in there is essentially all associated with it, but there's a primary foundation that he used to create this, to turn this little kind of community in Kentucky into a Stranger Things type location where all these weird things are happening. And that's exactly something that you can do with what Keith is talking about. It's the research is great to establish the foundation, but at a certain point, you need to let go of the training wheels and start doing some other things around that. But you do need that research to have the foundation for that. But it's amazing how much easier it is to do it that way than just to create something from scratch.
Oh my God, yes.
Or make something that's from a bygone era. I mean, I love 1920s, 1930s Call of Cthulhu. I think it's great. And there's a lot of good things going for it. And other particularly historical type settings in most role-playing games or alternative histories. But, it's an area that I'm only as familiar with as the person who is doing the research of this bygone era.
Right.
Whereas, modern day, or at least somewhat modern day, there's a lot more material to draw upon as opposed to, way back when.
Oh, yeah.
And again, I think when it comes to horror games, the more intimate you are with where this game exists, the more horrific it can become. Because, there's a comfy, cozy town in Kentucky. I mean, it's literally just, rolling hills, green trees, people saying, good morning, y'all, and
Ew.
whatnot. And it's, it's one of those things where it's just like, the sun rises, the sun sets, and so you get into a comfort level. And then to have that comfort level suddenly turn and twist and become, this horrible thing that suddenly your reality changes, impacts you more in game than it would be as a 1920s flapper in Chicago.
Right.
So.
Right.
But
I think that branch of a conversation goes down a whole nother road of some of the things I don't like about horror games.
Okay.
Personally, I don't know if we should do that as a separate topic or what, but maybe we'll come back to it in this episode, maybe in another episode. But
sure.
But Scott's right. We take some research, we find, for something we become familiar with it, and we have that foundation, and then we take it and we turn it on its head, right?
Yeah.
So like Eric Bloat did with his town that he used as his inspirational bit, and then took what he was familiar with, and then he morphed it into what it became. It's popular. People love it. People enjoy it. It is what it is. But it was inspired by a real place and real legends, real urban myths, and real locations.
Right.
But you're only going to get those bits of information if you do the research to then turn them on their head. So
right. It's shocking to me going to a Google search, right? And local folklore, yada, yada, yada city. It could be just a general location. It doesn't have to be your exact town, but, and eventually, usually something comes up, and sometimes a lot of things tends to come up, and it's just, you can, riding that wave is just, it's amazing what you can do with that. And I know this doesn't necessarily apply to role-playing games, because I know that's how a lot of people tend to, may write horror stories or come up with an idea for a horror movie or something like that. And, the other old quote, write what you know, that falls into play here. It's amazing how quicker and easier these connections can occur when you're drafting a horror game for whatever, system or RPG you're using, utilizing the things that Keith talked about, being somewhat familiar with, some of the locations and the aspects, and how easier it comes to you, again, than just trying to come up with, a ghost story in haunted house in blank city, USA, and the connections, the connections you'll find will be a lot quicker and sometimes shocking.
Yeah.
The liminal game that, the scenario that I did for liminal, essentially what started off as Liminal is a urban horror fantasy role-playing game that primarily is UK-centric, right? It's a beautiful game. It's a wonderful game. But if you're not intimately familiar with the UK, it may not be something of interest to you. So one of the things that I want to do is, let's use the liminal system and let's bring it over to the United States. How do I do that? Well, I don't really want to bring people from the UK to Eastvale, California, a milking community that's recently become a bedroom community. Boring. Where have I been? Well, I've been to New Orleans. What's a classic city to always have some sort of horror, nonsense? New Orleans, it's a go-to.
Oh yeah.
Well, what's something cool there? Well, I've been to New Orleans, right? And what instantly popped in my head is there's an old convent there, an Ursuline convent that there was rumors that girls were brought over from France in a certain day and age. There were rumors that they might be vampires or bringing over vampires. Okay, let's roll with this. And then how do I bring them from the UK? Because I want to get out of the UK and come to the US where I'm familiar and in a city I'm familiar with. Well, come to find out that the Ursuline Church is connected to the UK. The Ursuline sisters actually have finishing schools in the UK. Holy shit, I had no idea. And just the connection started to occur. And every
you did your research.
Did my research. And it's like, now it just makes sense. We start here, bring them over here, and every location within there is a place that I have visited in New Orleans, right? You know, the Absinthe Bar, the Voodoo Museum, all these other things that play a part of it, to me, allowed me to make it a lot more intimate and familiar as a GM, you know, for the players, because now they're people from the UK. They don't know what New Orleans is like. This is something new and exciting, but I can actually make it more so because did my research, familiar with these things, made the connection. I've been to these places, and boom, everything just kind of fell into place. Whereas, you know, if I had never been in New Orleans, you know, and just like, well, I think I'll just use New Orleans and figure something out as I go along. It probably wouldn't be, it would be more difficult, or I probably wouldn't even done something such as that. Cause it's like, this is cool, but I don't know what to do with it. You know,
but yeah. So then that drives the question, you know, yeah, you may have chosen New Orleans cause like everybody uses New Orleans for something, right? It's vampire and ghost story central. I've been to New Orleans too. Right.
Yeah.
But there's so much you could use from New Orleans, whether you're familiar with New Orleans or not. But then what little nugget do you take and use, and then where do you go with it, right? If you're just trying to build something, a scenario idea on the fly, what do you do with it?
Right. Yeah.
And that's, like, for me, that's where I just kind of go, meh.
Right. I could have made a connection to Captain Kidd, right? There's all sorts of Captain Kidd, you know, ghost stories and stuff like that.
Yep.
But when I was in New Orleans, we went on the tour of, you know, the Ursuline Church. We didn't do anything related to Captain Kidd. I knew about this thing before it even became a scenario. And so it's like, well, I'm familiar with this. I mean, even though, you know, there's so much interesting stuff that could be done with, you know, the ghost of Captain Kidd or something like that, or the horrors that are associated with it. But yeah, it just makes it easier in a way. And sometimes easy's good. You know,
Easy's not a bad thing.
It gets to the table quicker.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing if it gets you started and it gets you to the finish line.
Right.
Easy's not a bad thing.
No, not at all. What else? I mean, research is important to most anything, but
obviously, you know, in addition to research, you know, taking a place, obviously you're familiar with, ideally, if not a place that you are passionate about.
Sure.
Some place you've either visited, not necessarily where you live, but some place you visited or some place you know enough about to feel comfortable with is important. So that's a thing. Or legends, lores, ghost stories, folklore or folklore traditions, or weird mysteries. Something like the Black Dahlia murder comes to mind, right? Because you're talking about California.
Right.
Something that you have an interest in is going to make creating a horror story based around that legend or lore that much easier, and then making it a more immersive experience for your players, a more immersive story and an experience for your players that much easier and that much better.
Right.
I think you end up with that kind of writer's block situation if you just, New Orleans, and then Google, okay, Captain Kidd, and then the ghost of Captain Kidd, what do I do with it? And that's where you end up in that situation.
Or you're creating the umpteenth Anne Rice-esque vampire scenario. You know, it's and nothing wrong with that. But I mean, even something as simple as, you know, we had a crazy old homeless guy that would just pop up, like it would seem to us when we were kids, magically out of nowhere. Now, that's not really an urban legend. It's just something that you experience as a kid. But, you know, the fact that I grew up in Anaheim, okay, it's like, well, what's the most important thing in Anaheim? Disneyland, you know, and just like, well, who's this weirdo that keeps popping up? Well, that particular weirdo had a Walt Disney-esque mustache. holy shit, did Walt Disney not die? Is he a homeless man wandering around Disneyland? Is there some sort of, supernatural connection to this bullshit? And it just, like I said, it just kind of comes to you.
Dude, you got to write
easy.
that scenario. You got to do something with it, because we got to do something with this.
Right. But it just, don't bang your head against the wall. I mean, horror is hard enough to run, right? Yeah. And equally hard to create. And, ultimately at the end is you want to, frighten your players. You want them to have a good time. And you want them to, to essentially enjoy themselves and walk away going, that was great. Can we do more? Or can we,
right.
can we continue on with this? And, nothing wrong with written scenarios. I run them. I love them. And there's more talented people out there creating scenarios than I could ever could. But still, there's just, like I said, the more intimate you are with where your setting takes place, and again, the more research that goes into that, even if you're, if you're a scholar of Anaheim, still, having that bit of research is something that just breathes more life into that game. And if you haven't run a game that's centralized in a place that has these stories that you know about, or a place that you're, somewhat intimately familiar with, you should try it. You should definitely, and even if it's a written scenario, if it takes place in Chicago, fuck it. If you live in Las Vegas, tweak it a little bit and put it in Las Vegas, or Idaho, or Des Moines, or, Passamaquoddy.
Yeah. Passamaquoddy. Wow. We gone all the way across the country. No, so I mean, I know we keep harping on the research, right, and familiarity, right. But I honestly think that's very important. I'll give listeners an example.
Sure.
Our good friend Alex Galad is notorious for doing some very good research in his Call of Cthulhu scenarios.
Absolutely. At
present, I am running his newest Grindhouse scenario, the Any Winning, Los Hobos, and the Wolves of Carcosa.
Right.
I'm not going to go into spoiler territory because I'm running it and Scott's one of the players. But yeah, no spoilers for you, buddy. But he took some things that he was super interested about. I don't think he's ever been to these locations. However, but he took some things that he was very interested in, and then he dug into them, did some research. He found some other things that he didn't think. He didn't know anything about him because he was messaging me when he was doing the research, and he's like, "Holy shit! I just found I just spent hours going down this rabbit hole."
Sure.
And they ended up in the scenario. So even though this is a horror scenario, and it's going to be very much a horror scenario, it has historical elements in it, like the name of the train lines or the names of the trains are historical. You can research the trains, and they are the historical engine name is for the train that really existed, and the locations that the train goes through are real places, and the station names are real station names and stuff like that. It gives it a little bit of realism, but yet now Call of Cthulhu is played in the real world, right?
Right.
But there are things in it that obviously are turned on their head because it's Call of Cthulhu.
You mean there's no Innsmouth?
Let's not go there, or Arkham. But in this case, it's relatively, with some exceptions, it's all based in the real world. There's things in it that are historical, but things are turned on their heads, as the players will soon find out. But that's the kind of things that I'm suggesting. Like you roll in some of these like factual bits, and just something your players can anchor, like their minds on, like, okay, cool. Scott mentioned the 7-Eleven. Like 7-Eleven's a real place. There's always like the guy that works from the like noon to 7 behind the counter, right? That's a real thing. And that's something they can anchor and they know.
And that brings me to another point that Alex does exceptionally well. And this tends to play into Call of Cthulhu, but honestly, in I wouldn't say every type of RPG, but horror pretty much, or even modern day, is the handouts that he does. The handouts are something that definitely provides, again, a bit of intimacy within the game, because let's be honest, not every handout that Chaosium provides for Call of Cthulhu are the best. But Alex takes it to another level where, you know, these look like these were things that were handed out at a train station in San Diego in 1930s, whenever this occurs. But also to make another point of what Alex did with this scenario, which is interesting because there's a side effect to this doing your research and putting some detail into a real world area is Keith and the other players have probably never been to San Diego or Tijuana or other places. I have. I've been to that train station where the scenario takes place. I've been to Tijuana and seen the 1930 structures that still exist down there. And suddenly I'm taken to another place, even more so because it's like I could visualize these things that the characters are going through. And with the amount of research and dedication Alex put into the scenario, again, it's a lot more familiar than a fictional town on the coast of Maine that doesn't exist. Yeah, I can visualize a shanty town that's on a seaside village, sure. But if that shanty town is the fishing village, next to Monterey, California that I've been to or whatever, or Cannery Row, it's like, oh, that's different. I've been there. I know what that's like. I can see it better in my mind in that regard. So
to kind of like roll it all back in, that's kind of where my headspace has been at. You know, It's like I said, it's spooky season, and this time of year, like I tend to play more horror games, not always Call of Cthulhu, and I tend to run a little bit more. Again, not always Call of Cthulhu, but I also tend to sit there and go, oh, you know, there's all these crazy, you know, movies on TV or weird discovery shows on urban legends and all this, you know, stuff, late night TV and what have you. And I was like, oh, that's always an interesting idea. You know, that urban legend or that cryptid, that would be a cool thing for a story, whether it's a mystery or a horror story or an adventure story. Like I'm watching something on TV right now where they've discovered for the first time skeletons and some artifacts in Petra. It's not a horror thing, but that would be because that's where they filmed Indiana Jones.
Right.
Some scenes for Indiana Jones. So a new like real world discovery there, that could be the nexus for an adventure. A pulp type adventure. But the point being, can take that and then do some additional research on Petra and figure out like what's around the canyons at Petra and the Nabatean society that was at Petra, you know, and take some of that information and then build a scenario around it and a story idea around it. You know, so this time of year when you start watching all this stuff and you're exposed to a little bit more of the ghosts and goblins and horror stuff this time of year, that gets my creative juices flowing and my ideas. So, hence the topic.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, if you're running a horror RPG this horror season or whenever, it doesn't have to be because Christmas is just as horrific as Halloween. But God, you know, maybe take a moment and do something a little different. You know, do a Google search for wherever you live. See if there's a cool unknown local legend or folklore that exists around you. Change the location, you know, to your hometown or a town that you're familiar with. You know, change that house to, you know, the creepy old house, you know, that's on the edge of town or whatever the case may be. But, you know, I think you'll be surprised with the fact that with a little bit of research and a little bit of intimate knowledge of these things, it can make a horror game so much more impactful than just having it at another seaside shanty town on the east coast of the United States or, you know, under the gaslight of London that you've never ever been to or experienced. So, yeah, I think we've, you know, maybe did we actually tie a bow on this for once?
I think we did.
We didn't just trail off. Well,
yeah, shit. I think we did because I don't hear the toilet flushing. So, hey, that's a win for us.
Right. Well, why don't we take a short break and then we'll roll into the last segment of this episode. Well, listeners, we hope you enjoyed our rambling discussion. We do feel, like we said, we put a nice tight bow on there. But moving on to other things, before we conclude this episode, I'm going to tell you what's new with me. So, Keith, ask me what's new with me. Ask me what's new with me during the spooky season.
What's new with you in this grandest of spooky seasons?
Commensurate professionals is what we are. Flying by the seat of our pants, but this is all scripted. This isn't improvisational. Yes. So anyways, what I have been up to during the spooky season is I decided to run an old favorite that's been around for a while. The Dare for Call of Cthulhu. And this is for my local group. So I might be familiar with it. Yes, you are. You edited the scenario. Now we can do a whole segment of issues with, I wouldn't say the editing, but just the general aspect of the scenario.
Let's be clear. I did not edit it. I gave it a once over proofread for the publisher to help them get that Kickstarter fulfilled. Well, it was woefully behind. Well,
there's no spelling errors. I'll give you that. But as for other things like the maps, and other layout things. But anyways, it's easily rectified. You take a moment, and there's plenty of people who have done a once-over to provide, extra assistance with running the game. But all that aside, yes, local group. And most are relatively new. Well, not most. Two are relatively new to Cthulhu. Others have maybe played a game or two. But again, it's primarily a new group, right?
Okay.
So yeah, and for those who aren't familiar with the Dare is a scenario that takes place during Halloween. You play a group of children, and you use kind of a scaled-down version of the Call of Cthulhu rules to make play a little bit easier and kind of make it more centric to you're playing 11 to 12-year-old kids, and you've been dared to go into an old haunted house and spend the night there. And come dawn, you leave, and you've completed your dare. Easy, right?
Bullshit.
So you're tasked by a local bully who kind of pressures you to go spend the night in this haunted house, and I don't know. I will. It's kind of hard to describe it without a bit of spoiler, so I will say spoiler warnings now. I'm going to touch on a brief description of it. So if you're playing the Dare, go ahead and end here or fast forward to the credits or whatever. But you have been warned. So generally speaking, the Dare scenario it's an old house where, for lack of a better term, a Cthulhu mythos witch lives, so to speak. She's been living there in a long time, and for over a period of time, she's been coercing people to come to the house so she could feed. And now it's you and your fellow kids' turns to go in there. The bully, several nights earlier, broke into the house to do some vandalism. He was essentially killed by this witch and brought back to life as a really...
You don't say.
Yeah. Brought back to life as a zombie to trick other kids to come in to feed. So that's kind of the general premise. And of course, your kids who are stuck in this house and need to figure a way to get out or confront the horror within and stop it so you can, also leave. So like most Call of Cthulhu games, is extremely deadly. But you're dealing with children here. And granted, interesting enough, that since it deals with children, they do provide a PG and R-rated version of how to run the game. But to be fair, I would say it's more R-rated and X, because it's still Call of Cthulhu, right? The R-rated version is still going to end horribly. The X-rated is just going to have a lot more body horror and blood and guts and bugs and whatnot. So
fair. That's fair.
So it's okay. So the players themselves, right? So we're dealing with a couple new Call of Cthulhu players, and whose primary foundation is fantasy RPGs. So it was interesting. I started it kind of as they're entering the house, right? Because I didn't want to go through the whole introduction in the yard and everything. Let's just get on with the scenario. Okay. And I kind of changed it up a little bit. I believe it was I think the Ain't Slay Nobody podcast. Their premise is there are a group of kids who started a club. The bully stole, and in the club, they put a bunch of their own personal secrets inside of lunchbox. The bully stole the lunchbox and said, if you want your secrets back, you need to come to the old haunted house, spend the night,
a good idea,
and try to find your secrets, right? So it's a good way to kind of, jump them in through the front door, because I didn't want this to last like 3 or 4 sessions or anything. So, but, being fantasy RPG kind of D&D people, the one player, the first question was, what's stopping the 4 of us from teaming up on him, beating his ass, and getting our lunchbox back? And I'm like, fuck, that's a good question. Because as the characters, you're still kids, but you do have certain things with you that can be used as weapons.
Yep.
And I also allowed them to bring an object from home with them. So someone, brought, he's dressed up as a Star Wars character. So he's got the old, 80s kind of collapsible lightsaber that also is a flashlight. Someone has a BB gun with them because, he's a Boy Scout. Someone has a rope, that they decided just to bring because he's playing Indiana Jones. So he had like a length of rope that, would be his whip, because this is the 80s and it was homemade costumes. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, oh my God, this might end quickly if they decide to do that, because, but one of them confronted the bully, and of course the bully has better stats, and he, took them down rather quickly, and then we progressed in the scenario. So,
well, that's good.
Yeah. But I do feel they were kind of joking, because it was like, this is a one shot for them. And of course, when it comes to a one shot, it's like you're there for the ride, right? It's like we could end this now and go have nachos, but I think they were just kind of tongue in cheek joking. So it's a slow build. There's a lot of atmosphere involved in this game, as you know, as you proofread it, and but also, as you know, it's a bit disjointed. and how it's laid out. If you don't read through the scenario and take meticulous notes and move stuff around, you will find yourself scratching your head in certain instances where things don't match up according to certain layouts in the map and where places are within the house. So I made sure to cover all that the best that I could. But to move on, they did what was typical. Since they're looking for their lunchbox, they have a reason to start exploring the house, and so the usual things occurred. As it slowly builds, things are getting creepier and creepier, and things are happening in the house. Rats are skittering by, noises are playing. There's, is that something in the mirror? I'm not sure. And then a rainstorm hits. And so they pretty much made their way through most of the downstairs of the house. A certain part of the upstairs, one of them made their way up to the attic through the trap door, but again, spoilers, but was memorized by a reflection of the witch in the mirror. So he ended up kicking them down the trapdoor ladder and closing it. So he was in the attic by himself. And so horrific hilarity ensued at that point. And so, and of course they're being taunted by the bully this whole time.
Oh yeah.
But we essentially got to a stopping point where we had to call it for the next session. This will conclude the next time we meet.
Okay.
So they haven't really figured out what it is with the house, but one of them had enough of the bully Roger where they hit him hard enough, and it revealed, oh no, he's not Roger anymore. He is a zombified version of Roger filled with bugs and worms and other stuff. And so they had that confrontation. One of them got horribly stabbed with a kitchen knife.
Nice.
And another one, two of them actually went temporarily insane. So one of them is trying to bust his way out of the house, but the doors are locked, the windows don't open, the glass doesn't shatter. And that's so at the moment they're back at the front door. One of them, they were fortunate enough to take down Roger, and but they're now dealing with what the hell's going on, and we can't get out. And
yeah, so they've realized they can't get out. Yeah,
right.
That's good.
And then one of them saw a reflection of the witch again, who used her mesmerize spell that she has at her disposal to try to send one of the kids to the basement. He passed his power roll, surprising enough. She has 120 power.
Wow.
So, but he passed it. But now they're like, what's in the basement? You know.
So now they're intrigued. Yeah.
Right. And of course, the witch itself doesn't look like a witch. In the scenario, the witch looks like their grandmother. Yep. Right. An image of their grandmother. So now they can't get out. Maybe there's something in the basement. They've seen, they have the rat things and the bat things that are from the Witch House story by H.P. Lovecraft. So they've seen those. They've been confronted by the cat, and right before the scenario, the evening concluded, the cat started laughing in a human voice. So that was another sanity roll. So there's been tons of sanity rolls, and it's been awesome. Nice. And it's just been eating away at them slowly but surely. So when we meet up again, they've realized that they're stuck. Where else can we go to get out of this house? And the only other place for them to go is the basement. And so, nice. And one other thing, again, spoilers, just for your knowledge, is yes, they found the person in the closet. So that's kind of what set everything off. So
nice.
So one player who this essentially is his second game that he's ever played. His first game was D&D, and then third, the Old School Essentials game that I'm running for them. That we're taking a break for the spooky season, and he really enjoyed it. I mean, he's like, "This is really cool. I've never played an RPG like this. This is his first horror RPG, and so that was nice. That was a nice add-on." So I've rambled a bit long, but that's what I've been up to with spoilers intertwined. Nice. Yeah.
Well, sounds like you guys, your players are having fun. So it's a win.
Yeah. No, I mean it's a win-win all around because I'm having fun running it, and I'm definitely looking forward to the next session for Los Hobos because I'm ready. I'm ready for shit to go south. And it's going Alex south, which means it's going grindhousey south. So that booze train ride is not going to be what I assume it's going to be at this point in time. So yeah.
Oh yeah.
So it sounds like we've got some good things rolling for the spooky season, which is great.
Yep. Hope listeners do too. So hope everybody that's listening is getting in their preferred spooky season games, whatever that is for you. A horror themed fantasy game, a cult, Call of Cthulhu, whatever floats your boat. Hope you're getting your game in.
Yeah, let us know. So. Drop us a line. Drop us a line. Let us know what games that you're running for the spooky season, what you prefer. Anything. Just give us an idea of what others are engaging in. Of course, that can always lead other people to games they're not aware of, which is always great and fantastic. But, well, what do you say?
I say before we roll on out of here, just a quick pitch for our Patreon listeners. If you'd like to hear this episode ad-free and get some interesting videos of us doing this stuff when we're in the studio, become a patron. Support us over on Patreon. The link will be in the show notes below. We'd love to have your support, and that's it. Let's roll on out of here.
Let's head on out of here and go get some free candy, and I will get my sexy outfit on for you.
With that, we are out.
Insert diabolical laughter here.
Hey, Titterpigs fam, just a quick reminder, we do have our Patreon going on. It's patreon.com/Titterpigs. You can show your support there. We have 2 tiers for you, a $3 and a $6 tier, so show us some love and be part of our growing community.
And speaking of our current community, I would like to give a shout out to our current Patreon members, Dr. Mitch, Jason Sheets, Bud's RPG Review, Dwayne Costa, William Payne, Lupus Malum, Salt Heart, Patrick Mullen, Dragon Girl 74, and our newest member, Crafty Matt Craft.